you're saying that you're talking about the harder music
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Pink
yeah.
Floyd.
Just kind of the late '90s kind of heavy stuff. That's definitely my background too. At least as an early listener, you know, and kind of some of the sounds that that kind of influenced my kind of energy around what I like in music and some of that stuff. So yeah.
It it's funny, like I one of the things, like, I always call them like soundscapes, but like that's what I loved about the Deftones, of
Oh
that, like
man.
the sonic texture of what was
Yeah.
going on. I love that, and they replicated live too.
Hmm. Oh yeah. I've never seen Deftones live. I've seen a lot of those bands, but yeah, man. Chino Marino, and I think it was a producer named Terry Date that did. I know he did Adrenaline. I'm almost positive he might have done both, Around the Fur and Adrenaline. And I mean, both of those records were just iconic to me. But yeah. So yeah, man. I mean, I never get to work on music like that, but I definitely loved it when I was, young.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
So with the stuff you're focused on now, like, well, obviously you're not, you know, genre specific, but you've been doing a lot of work with the Texas country artists.
yeah, and I would say even more so kind of in that alt Americana lane. Um, as I did the Geronimo record for Shane Smith and the Saints, and that was a really fun project, and really just an incredible what kind of the legs that got under that project independently. It's just been incredible to watch. Um, you know, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I kind of come at working in that genre a little left of center. It's like I'm always trying to do stuff that's a little outside the box for the genre, because when I was a younger engineer, I worked on, you know, just because I worked at various studios in various capacities, not always as a producer, not always as anybody that had any say so. I was just kind of there to record or whatever. And, so I ended up working on a variety of Texas country and things like that. And, and I sometimes I would just kind of be like, man, too much of this just kind of sounds the same. Like it's in the same lane. It's like I've heard these songs before. So it's like, when interestingly enough, when I got the call through Tim, who now goes by Tim Lightyear, but um, Tim was a buddy of mine before he was in the Saints. And when they went to start making that record and he was the guitar player, I think he had he had some ideas for production in that album as well, but he was kind of, pretty green as a producer at that point. And, so he called me, to record it, but knowing also that I had the, kind of the sensibility and the experience of producing a lot of, records in big studios like that. We did that at Orb down in Austin, which is Blue October's studio, and which it's a killer room. And yeah, when Tim called me to do that and put me in touch with Shane, one of the things I said to Shane like really early on was like, I was like, man, I don't have any interest in making like a down the middle Texas country record with you. I was like, I feel like you guys could be a national band and we don't need to focus on appealing to like the Texas market. I actually said that directly to Shane. I was like, I want to make a record with you that appeals to everyone. Like I want to make a genre crossing, outside the lines kind of album with you. And they took a chance and went down that road, and clearly it paid off because Shane is a very unique sound anyway. It's got roots influence, it's got folk influence, it's got Appalachian influence, it's got, all those 4-part harmonies. There's all kinds of things that, don't really pigeonhole it into a regional type of record or a regional type of band. And so we very intentionally, made something that was kind of not just for Texas, and so and that seems to have worked because, Geronimo, thankfully had really launched him to the stratosphere, as far as growing his following and his fan base and being able to tour, all over the world. And, it's just incredible to watch. And Shane and those guys are some of the most hardworking musicians I've ever met. I mean, that's one of the things I really like about that genre, about both country and Americana, and even folk music and things like that, is it's one of those genres where, people can still put in the hard work and see the rewards,
Yeah.
and Shane is kind of like the crowning example of that, of an independent artist who, never took a major label deal, but is selling out Red Rocks, at this point. It's awesome. That's what everybody hopes for, and to see him pull that off. I mean, it's just, I've got a lot of respect for his work ethic and his business sensibilities and being able to do all that,
Yeah, they're incredible.
Yeah.
And I have to ask,
Mhm.
so like the people that sell out like stadiums and whatnot, like all like the guys on the radio, they all their music, all their mixes, they all sound the same. They all sound like, like sterile and plastic. But I've heard a lot of the stuff that you recorded, and what I love about like what people like you do, like your mixes and your recordings have personality. They have feel to them. You know what I
Oh,
mean? Like
thanks, man.
I feel that's really lacking in you know, the stuff you hear on the radio. Like it's just really weird, and it's kind of frustrating because there are a couple people that, like I believe on the radio, that like it doesn't capture the personality of their voice. It's like they all put it in like the same preset. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you know, I I mean, you know, I don't actually like, I don't have any animosity towards commercialism. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I find that I mean, the record industry is so hard, and the fact that anybody can make money doing it is just, I mean, that's like, you know, that's incredible. I mean, because kind of that's kind of the challenge, right? Is the art versus commerce aspect of this business. People get into this business, and I got into this. Everybody I know got into this business because of passion, because of art. Like nobody initially like cared if they made any money, right? But unfortunately, because of the framework of the system that we live in the world, we've got to make money, to survive in the capitalist hellscape that we live in. And so, I honestly applaud anyone that can do that. I don't really, you know, I don't slight people for selling out. I mean, if anything, it's like where it's like where it goes south is lack of authenticity, right? But the thing that I have found to be true, and I haven't worked with a bunch of celebrities or anything. I don't really know a lot about that world, but the thing that I have found to be true is that the most successful records and artists that I either watch or have worked on or whatever, it's all rooted in authenticity, regardless of how commercially successful it becomes. It's rooted in authenticity because people can smell that. They have like a sixth sense about things that are inauthentic, and that's where, a lot of people in my world are starting to have these discussions about the, influence of AI in music. And, there's all kinds of discussions going on surrounding that. But, you know, um, I actually I think I saw like a headline on Instagram today that somebody had built an algorithm that can tell with 100% accuracy whether or not music was created with AI.
Huh.
And I was like, wow, and I now thinking back on that, I'm like, man, I should have saved that because I'll probably never see it again. But it's like, and but I feel like, a lot of the people that are having the discussion surrounding the humanity in music are talking about, how it doesn't matter if AI can, build a song or produce a quote record that sounds whatever. It's, that there's going to be a lack of human authenticity in it because the machine, even though it can learn from humans, it doesn't have that intrinsic, soul that is the human being that, and I think that's the intangible aspect of, you know, of art and humanity and making records. And that is actually the thing I think that drives sales, that drives success, even for the big artists. I mean, I saw Casey Musgraves at AA Center a few months ago, and I was absolutely floored at just, how authentic her performance was, how authentic her persona was, and also how just unbelievably perfect she was as a performer. It was mind blowing, and so it's like, it's no surprise to me that there's that level of success surrounding that, because it is literally the highest, caliber of execution within, the craft of making that type of art and records, and so, but it really is driven, I think, by authenticity, whether that's from songwriting or just the way that an artist carries themselves, or, and I think that the artists that are seeking success and trying to mold themselves in a way to capture that, and not just doing what is perfectly true to them, that's, kind of a hamster wheel that's never going to work, and and I kind of learned that, listening and talking to some executives, and one person in particular who's a legendary radio promoter. When I was younger, like producing some artists, I came to her and I was like, hey, like, if we have a budget, can we get this on the radio? And she was like, well, it doesn't just work like that. She's like, that's only part of the equation. It's like, there has to be a story, there has to be something for people to talk about, there has to be something, and usually there's a whole methodology to getting artists to that level. And I know that that's been, in a lot of people's view, largely diluted by, like, the labels chasing TikTok fame over the last few years and things like that. And, those, I don't know, because I don't follow it that closely, but it's like, I can't tell you like the statistics on how many of those turned into a one-hit wonder versus any kind of sustainable career. I don't really know. But, I know that, some of the big labels have caught a lot of flack for that being kind of their metric, as opposed to, developing people. But then you hear stories about, like what just happened with Tim, with Big Loud and Big Loud Texas. They created this Texas music division of Big Loud, which is a major publisher and record label in Nashville. And I mean, it's like the story that everybody dreams about. I mean, what happened to him? Did he tell you guys this on the show?
I don't I don't think so. That's why
So like, you know, uh, I mean, listening to him tell me that, I just found it so interesting because, he was playing, what is that thing in McKinney? Is it Texas Music Revolution? Is that the,
I have no idea.
yeah, well, it was like a show up in McKinney, and I think it was a festival. I think that's the one. It was just back this fall, or fall of 2024. And, he was playing like early in the day, maybe the opening thing, it was like at 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. or something. And, his band was late. And so Tim was up there on the stage by himself playing acoustic. And then like the guys started showing up. I wasn't there for this. This is just the story that I've been told, but the guys started showing up, and like the drummer walked on stage. Tim didn't stop playing, and he just kind of picked up his sticks and joined in. And then the same thing happened with the bass player like a few minutes later. And it's amazing because it wasn't planned that way, but it actually created like this really cool moment, and then they had a great set from there on or whatever. But, it almost looked like some kind of, lackadaisical musicians showing up going, oh man, yeah, look at how, we just, have that kind of carefree, we're just going to pick up and start playing vibe. Well, anyway, I don't know which person from Big Loud was in the crowd watching him that day, but it, within a few days of playing that show, he started getting messages on Instagram and people following him from Big Loud Publishing and Records. And he was like, what is going on? And then some of his acquaintances were like, hey, so-and-so's trying to get a hold of you. They want to talk to you. They saw you at that show the other day. And he was like, what? And so anyway, the conversation developed, and, he's ended up getting a pub deal just recently with them, and this is like a story you hear in the 90s, like, oh, the A&R guy saw you on the opening set on a Sunday afternoon, and all of a sudden, you got a deal, and it's like, that just doesn't happen anymore. Like, that's not how it works, and lo and behold, it just did happen for Tim that way, and they're interested in working with him. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the deal, but I know that Tim has told me that they're on board with helping him grow, which is what a label should be doing, right? That's what a publisher and a label, that's kind of the original idea of what, labels did for artists was, they came with a little bit of capital and some connections, and then they helped develop the art, and again, his is, I guess, I think, I don't know the ins and outs of it. I think it's a publishing deal, not a record deal, but regardless, it's like they're saying, hey, we believe that you have something to offer as a songwriter, and we want to help you develop that. And so that, that's incredible. And that's all just goes back to the point of, that all happened because Tim is 100% authentic in what he's doing. There's no BS. There's no filter. There's no facade. It's just him living his truth and making great music, and that's what works, so, that's what I always encourage when I'm working with an artist, is to try and find that, what is it that really is, what are you really trying to say? What are you really doing this for? Tell me the stories of the songs. How do we make the most artistic version of that's the truest form of what it is that is in your soul, that you're trying to get out of your body into the world to share with people. And, that's kind of the ethos that I try to bring to working with artists and figuring that out. It's more of a, almost a meta thing. There's hundreds of people that can record, and artists can record themselves. I mean, the technology's there. It's not really what it's about, when working with a producer. Now, obviously, I do try to also capture great sounds and make things sound good. And, and it's interesting because I don't produce as much as I used to. A decade ago, I was producing a lot more. Budgets were a little different. People still were doing a lot more live music in recording studios. And these days, I don't really get the opportunity to produce as much. People lean on me more to help finish records, as a mixer and and a mastering guy even now, so, a lot of times I'm just kind of in the finishing stretches. I don't get to have that conversation with the artist as much anymore, but I do love doing that. I love, and that's kind of what I got to do with Evan Boyer last year, who I know was just on the show. We kind of got the opportunity to make a record like that where we really got to dig in,
Yeah.
And kind of unearth what we thought were the best versions of the songs and get really creative on some of them and things like that. So
Yeah, and it sounds great. And I I was on your Instagram today, and I saw a really cool term I never heard before. I hope I didn't get. You described like getting a sound of dark clarity.
yeah,
I love that.
yeah, man. Well, I owe the credit to that on my buddy Matthew Scott Ragland, who's kind of an indie artist, more so. He's not a country artist in any manner. He was in a band called Nello that was kind of a popular college band about a decade ago. They played kind of the East Coast colleges a lot, and and then he kind of, that band broke up, and he got into commercial real estate and is pretty successful in that. But he's got this soul of an artist. I mean, Matt really is like a true artist and a great songwriter. And I had the opportunity during COVID to make, I mean, he made the record, he self-produced it, but I kind of worked real hand in hand with him on finishing it, and especially coming up with some of the sonic landscapes and what it was. And we kind of defined that because, believe it or not, we mixed that album twice, which doesn't happen very often. But Matt was so invested in the art of it that we did some mixes early on that sounded great, and by most people's standards would have been like, oh man, that's awesome, cool, it's done, put it out or whatever. But Matt had this vision of what he wanted it to sound like, and he thought that what we had come up with was maybe a little too polished, a little too shiny, a little too I don't know, he just thought it was maybe a little bright, or maybe a little too big even. Oftentimes people want their records to sound as big as possible, right? Because they're competing with what you were talking about, where some of the stuff on the radio is just completely smashed. I mean, it's, some of it sounds really impressive, but it's really loud and everything's really compressed. And, and he was just like, man, I just want it to be, a little more organic. And we came up with this idea of dark clarity. Like, we didn't want it to be muddy, right? We didn't want it to be muted or muffled or lo-fi, but so we wanted clarity, but we wanted dark clarity. We didn't want it to feel shiny. And so, and we did that. And so we remixed the album with that ethos in mind, like with that whole objective of dark clarity. And I think we succeeded in that. I mean, he was happy, I was happy. It it was a real cool creative endeavor. And it was, it was really fun doing that because it also brought us to a whole new level of understanding of each other as friends and as humans. And, you know, when that's really kind of my favorite part about working hand in hand with artists is, when you really get to dig in, you go deep, you know, it's not like a lot of transactional things in this world where you hire somebody to do something and, um, it's like they do the job and it's like, okay, well, thank you. And here's the payment and whatever. And it's very, surface level. And even if you think they did a good job, it's just like, okay, well, thanks. And on with my day. It's when you really get to work with an artist, um, in tandem for a common objective, it's, you know, it's almost impossible not to, you know, not only become friends, but kind of really create some kind of bond with that person. I think that's the most beautiful part about this industry is that the people who make records together a lot of times really love each other, and and they really got each other's backs, and those are lasting relationships, you know, um, and it's meaningful on so many levels, and yeah, I just that's really one of my favorite parts about getting to, you know, kind of really go the distance with an artist, is the humanity of it and the tangibility of the interactions. And even when there's like disagreements of like, oh man, I don't think it should be like that, and you kind of got to work through these things together to find that magic. That's what makes it fun, and that's what makes it special, and that's what makes it unique, because if you did that with a different set of people, it would be a different outcome, and so that's what's fun about it. And that's what's great about when an artist has the choice to kind of build a team, or when they come to a producer and the producer helps them build a team. That's kind of what it's all about. And that's, I know that Evan, when he was on your show, was talking about like Tim and what Tim brought to that album. And yeah, and that was a very intentional decision on my part to kind of bring Tim into the fold, because I knew that he would add, an element that we didn't have, and Tim and I work really well together when we're in the studio. I mean, we've done enough projects, and we have kind of that, extra sensory communication sometimes of being able to be like, yeah, man, that thing. And he's, you don't have to finish it. Yeah, that thing, and you just kind of dive in, and go. It's fun, So.
Yeah. And you guys are both building studios at your own house, right?
Well, yeah, Tim built a really nice recording studio out on his property in Royce City. And I'm currently in the middle of building out a new mix room at a house that I just bought over in Garland. And it's going to actually be a Dolby Atmos capable mix room. And, so on Apple Music, they have that thing called spatial audio, which, when you listen in headphones, it's like a 360 kind of experience. Yeah. Or if you listen on a home theater, and they'll bring it to more cars, in the coming years. But yeah, that's all derived from a Dolby Atmos mix environment, the same way they do it in movie theaters. And so I'm building a mix room for myself that has that capability to start offering that, to artists. A lot of the Nashville label artists had their catalogs remixed in Dolby Atmos, and what really the brand is spatial audio for Apple, because Spotify doesn't have an immersive audio, capability yet. Everybody's kind of waiting to see if and what they do with that. I think if Spotify does go the route of doing some immersive audio stuff, that's going to really increase the demand for that format, especially with the independent artists. because the label artists are all already kind of on that. You know, a bunch of my friends that have studios in Nashville, you know, are working on some of that stuff, and you know, most of the major records get mixed in both spatial and stereo now. But it's kind of a new thing, especially for, you know, the Texas market and the Texas country artists and the Americana artists and some of those folks. You know, it's like they, you know, either don't have access or don't have, you know, a reason to do it yet or whatever. But you know, it's going to be cool to have that capability and kind of offer that service, because there's not a lot of that infrastructure here yet. You know, I only know of like 2 other studios in the area that even have the capability of doing it. And it's also something where it's not something that like a quote bedroom studio can just set up that easily, because it's, you know, to do it right, you know, you have to have like at least a 12 speaker, you know, immersive setup with speakers on the ceiling and things like that. So it's like a 7.1.4 minimum environment, you know, the same way you would have for like a film. And so it's not something that's going to be quite as easy to replicate, you know, for kind of the average home studio owner. So I kind of want to have that as a tool for the area, you know, for people to come use and you know, experiment with and learn that format and just kind of offer that. So that should be, I should have that totally ready and functional by March, you know.
Nice.
It's getting, yeah, like we're in like the drywall stages right now. You know, I was soundproofing the room over there. We tore everything out and, you know, put new insulation in the walls and hung resilient channel and a couple layers of different materials on the wall so that it's kind of a floating wall, and, you know, dampen the floor. And, you know, so we're really getting the room, you know, more soundproof and getting all those different speaker lines run and clean so that that's going to be available. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I would love to be in a room with 12 speakers.
Yeah, man. Well, you should come on by and check it out, you know?
Yeah, that'd be cool. Now,
Yeah.
now with that, do you mix? I was reading, you mix. You said what? Somebody asked you like, what's the best way to mix? And you said I believe 86 decibels.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting. Yeah, that's kind of a rabbit hole. I mean, there's in the audio world, there's a thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve, and basically what that means is that the flattest frequency response for your hearing, in which you're kind of properly hearing bass and properly hearing the high frequencies, you know, is actually at like about 83 decibels.
Wow.
You know, and that's called the Fletcher-Munson curve. And so if you're listening too quietly when you're mixing, you're going to enhance certain things and, you know, oftentimes make things too bright. And if you're listening too loud, you know, because of the high mid frequencies, your ears try to kind of protect themselves a little bit when things get too loud. And so oftentimes you're going to end up under mixing the high frequencies if you're cranked up too much. Now, I mean, some people, you know, depending on what their background is in the music world, if they're an engineer that also plays live and tours a lot or plays drums or whatever, they might have some hearing loss. And so, you know, who knows? I mean, you know, everybody hears differently. That's what's interesting about hearing too, is, you know, what I have is the quote curve of my hearing is not the same as the next person. And so, but yeah, I have a system that I work in where I monitor, you know, I listen to mastered, you know, records, and I kind of work on my stuff that's going to be at a mastered level around that 83 to 85 dB range. And that, that kind of calibrated, you know, type of monitoring for me has really helped me get consistent mixes, you know. because as I kind of ramped up as a mix engineer and less of a producer recordist, and more of a mixer, over the last decade, it kind of started slow. I I was producing and recording a bunch in like the early 2000s and all the way up until about 2012. I was in the studio and oftentimes in big studios for, multiple days a week, working and, working with humans, recording music. And I kind of saw like the turning of the tides a little bit in the early like 2010s, with, all of a sudden Logic got purchased by Apple, and, GarageBand started becoming more ubiquitous, and, the universal audio interfaces started coming to market. And all of a sudden I saw like, hey, I think a lot of people are going to start recording themselves. And, the virtual instruments, the stuff that's, that sounds real, but it's in the computer. Those started getting a lot better around that, about 15 years, 12, 15 years ago. And so I just kind of was like, man, I don't know if I'm still going to have a gig, So I was like, people might be able to make music, but they're probably not going to be able to mix it. So I kind of started working on getting really good at mixing. And so, which was a long road. It's not easy to get good at, because you can't shortcut it. It's something where you just have to spend a lot of time listening. You have to spend a lot of time training your ears. It's not so much technology that you need to learn. It's more just ear training and kind of understanding what it is you're listening for, what it is that translates, and it just takes time to learn that. But yeah, as I kind of got better and better at it, along the way, the great thing about this industry is, there's a lot of people that are willing to share. And along the way, my buddy Rob Burrell, who's a Grammy-winning mixer up in Nashville, I lived up there for a few years, and Rob came over to my studio one day, and we got to talking about monitoring, and and he's the one that kind of showed me the right way to calibrate my monitoring, and it kind of changed my life. Really, it changed my outlook on how I was mixing stuff, and it has it's helped me a lot since then. So yeah, I try to pass that knowledge on where I can to other engineers. But yeah, so
Now, as someone that loves capturing sounds and likes producing the best you possibly can, has it been frustrating that so many more people are consuming it and listening to music through phone speakers? Or is that just, you have to adapt?
yeah, I mean, I did have an artist, probably, I mean, it's been almost 10 years ago now, but it was while I was living in Nashville. I was mixing an artist, and I did have somebody send me a mix revision that said, hey man, can you do, I don't remember what the request was, but it was, hey, can you do so-and-so to the mix or whatever? Because when we were listening on our phone with it in a bowl on the kitchen table, it sounded like this. And I was like, what? I was like, you want me to revise the mix because you had your phone in a glass bowl on the kitchen table and it sounded a certain way, And, and I mean, look, he may have been right about that regardless of the, the environment that was listening in. Maybe that's just what made him catch what he was feeling about the mix. But yeah, I found that to be really comical, because I was just like, well, man, could you go listen at least on like, I mean, let's get to at least the AirPods. I mean, can we, right? Can we at least get it like out of the fishbowl and into your ears? But no, I mean, for years, forever, for all of history, people have been judging mixes in the car, I remember hearing a story. I don't remember which producer this was, but it was one of the big, producers from the 80s and 90s was talking about how back then they used to set up FM transmitters in the studio, out in LA, and they would set it to a certain band, that wasn't used by a radio station, and they would play it back in the studio off the board or have the intern play it, and they'd go ride in the car down the freeway or whatever, listening to the FM transmission so that they could hear what it would sound like over, FM radio, while they were still working on it in the studio. And I was like, man, that's cool. That's a cool idea, So, I mean, we have all kinds of tools now. It's funny because we have all kinds of tools about like I can actually have an application where, I can put it on my mix while I'm working and hear how it'll sound in the Ogg Vorbis format that is Spotify. Truth is, I never do that. I don't really care. It's like I mix because I have my own like standardized version of monitoring in the studio. I kind of know at this point what's going to translate and what's not. And so I kind of know what's going to translate and what's not. And so I will listen to stuff in my car. It's interesting. Tim and I actually discovered a couple years ago that forever we were using Dropbox, right? It's like I would finish a mix and throw it in Dropbox, and then I'd go open the app in the car and listen to it. And Tim called me up one day and he was like, "Hey man, what's with the distortion on the side channels, when he sings certain words?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, "Yeah, there's like a crackling thing and it's only on kind of the sides. It's not really I was like, "Well, the singer had kind of a raspy voice." I was like, "Man, it's probably just his voice, And he was like, "Well," he's like, "I don't know, man. It doesn't sound that way." And I was like, "Well, I don't really hear it over here, And then I got to thinking about it and I was like, "Man, I wonder if it's the app, And so I got on my earbuds and opened up my phone and played it back while I was sitting in the studio on my AirPods over the Dropbox, And sure enough, there was like a crackly distortion on the sides. And I was like, "Oh my God." And so then I downloaded the file. You know how you can download the actual file to your phone and put it in your documents folder or whatever on your phone. And I did that and I opened it and I played it and it wasn't there.
Wow.
And I was like, uh-oh. And so we kind of discovered that the Dropbox web player and phone app are not a one-to-one playback of the master. And so, which was crazy to me because I had been sending out references for years to artists and getting people, because nobody takes the time to download the file these days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I literally oftentimes will, like on iMessage on my studio computer, just text, a link to the artist of the finished master, and then they just open that on their phone and listen to it, and hopefully they're streaming it to the car or something and not just like listening over the phone speaker, but you never know. I mean, and I think this runs up and down the chain. I mean, artists, even probably Taylor Swift is listening to rough mixes in Dropbox. You know what I mean? So it's like, I was just kind of dumbfounded. I was like, man, so much music is being referenced this way and it's not accurate. It's not an accurate representation of the master. And so, I immediately went and found a different app. Right now I'm using an app called Disco, which is what a lot of music supervisors for films use. And it seems to be a more one-to-one playback player. It's like what I hear in the studio is what I get on the app kind of thing. And, so I've started sending out Disco links to the artists that I work with to reference as opposed to Dropbox. I'll still send a Dropbox folder when the project's done, to deliver the assets, but we're not referencing off of that. So yeah, that's kind of the challenge, right? It's like we're living in this digital world where everything's like all about immediacy,
Yeah.
When I started, I mean, we were burning CDs, and that was the only method of listening to reference a mix. And that's just long gone, you know? It's
Yeah.
like I said, nobody's even gonna download the file, you know? It's like if you send them a Dropbox link, they're gonna go to the web player, they're gonna open the app. They're not gonna download the file. And so, yeah, it's kinda like there's a whole new layer of education that has come with some of this where, artists, it's not just producers and engineers, like artists have to be reasonably tech savvy,
Right.
to kind of operate in today's world, I mean, whether it's social media and reels and things of that nature. I mean, they're doing their own edits on reels. I mean, some of these people are really good at this stuff, creating all this content. But then even, finding those gotchas, about, and I even noticed like on Instagram, like the original reel, and then if you go to reshare it, it's not going to be as loud. I don't know if you noticed that, but like
Huh.
there's all kinds of weird things going on with these digital replications, and um, so it's really important to kind of educate artists, of like, hey, okay, I'm going to send you this. It's labeled this. Don't alter the file. Don't put it in any other app. Just upload it to your, distributor, and you know get it there without altering it in any way. So yeah, there's a little bit of education involved too, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And as for media, like what would be the most accurate representation of what you captured in the studio? Would it be vinyl?
Not necessarily, because if you recorded it digitally, you know what I mean, then the most accurate representation